Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood production. We are officially in spoiler season, recording this Sunday, March, what is it, March 5th, I believe.
Fifth.
So
Yep.
we are, yeah, not too many spoilers left at this point. So we are kind of gathering the information about what's being spoiled. Some pretty spicy stuff. We decided this week to essentially release in two parts because there's a lot of cards to look through here. And it's not necessarily like the best cards like for any particular format or in the set, but it's kind of our top five picks for cards to look at for various reasons, and we split it up into everything up to and including Saturday spoilers, and everything from Sunday and beyond will be out on the Thursday. And so, without further ado, I am
Yep.
joined by my co-creator, co-commentator, co-caster, co-compatriot Rob, and these cards are kind of a collection. So Saturday seemed like a pretty heavy day for assassin spoilers, right? Assassin, a couple ranger spoilers, and then
Yep.
Sunday seemed like the spoilers for ninja cards, and like some of the stragglers for ranger and such. But so we're gonna have a couple assassin cards on here, but
hmm
going to start off with the first one, as you can see on the screen, red back shroud. So we have the legendary assassin chess piece. Blocks for one is battle worn, so kind of the same idea is
The
the
Mask
leg
of
piece, like
Perdition.
perdition. I forget what the
The
leg piece is called for
Black Tech Whisperers, I
Black
believe.
Tech Whisperers. Yeah, so same kind of stat line is there. But as a attack reaction, it also comes back with silvers. So same
Yep.
kind of contract silver mechanism that Arachne was using in Dynasty. But red back shroud. So the ability is essentially a discount, right? So it is a recurring armor piece, so you are going to get that one power back. But in reality, this slot is competing with Tunic. So the ability is quite strong because it enables you to get a reoccurring discount on one power pumps. Uh, as far as making them free, in the addition to be able to play a two power pump more easily. We're talking about pummel here, folks. Let's not just say
I
two
think it's the
power
only
pumps.
one actually.
It's the one that Arachne was definitely running because Surgical's a two power, CNC is a two
hmm
power, and our next card is also a two power that he may or may not dabble in. So playing the two power pumps for one and being able to play the one power pumps for free. So it
hmm
makes the spike cards, so spike with inertia, spike with blood rot, it makes them free. If you're kind of like running the new young Arachne, I don't really expect this to, because that those rely on stealth. So it maybe Arachne to Zuri. I don't expect old Arachne to really be running
hmm
these pumps. But importantly, it makes Razor Reflex free.
Yep.
Makes Spreading Plague, which is another one of the new cards, which I liked, other than the fact that it costed one. So this definitely has the ability to. That's the one that creates X blood rot, where X is the amount of defending cards on the chain link
Yeah.
or
It
sort
was
of
that
daggers on the
specific
chain link.
chain link. Yeah.
Yeah, something along those lines. But it is the one that creates X blood rots. Short and sharp. I think that's the other one. That's like the one for three buff on daggers and such.
hmm
And it does work on the silver mechanic as I mentioned, but because Azuri doesn't really seem to be wanting to play with the contract mechanic that much, because her
Yeah.
entire ability relies on playing a stealth card, and then she's able to attack react, get it out of there. I'll put it to the bottom and then banish card from hand and play it instead. So it might be a sideboard in certain matchups, possibly, but I think this is a good way of kind of baiting out more easily than with Tunic, to the point where if you do need extra armor, that you're able to recur, because Tunic is just a one-time use, right? But you could
Yeah.
potentially get more than one armor decently easily with Redback. You could probably get at least two, if not three plus, depending on what you're bringing back. But the reduction, I think, will depend on the matchups and your kind of like density of reactions that you're able to discount. So that's red back shroud. I don't know
Yep.
if Rob, you
Um,
want to add anything there.
no, I echo that. For me, the bottom line is you're comparing it to Tunic because that is the other
Mhm,
premier slot piece, for the body armor. And I think as
mhm,
long as you can use this to gain more resources than you would with Tunic, it's worth it. Plus the recurring
mhm.
block, I think, makes this worthwhile. So if you're running the silver generation mechanic, I would say this is probably better than Tunic. The other thing though is that it does compete. You're using the silvers for Red Back Shroud, where you could be using it for your Mask of Perdition instead, but
Mhm,
it just gives you another option. So if you're
mhm.
using attack reactions more often, this is probably a better option than Tunic.
Yeah, and of course that armor, right? Because if you're able to get two armor off this thing, but you're able to get like the same energy usage, then you're doing pretty good.
Yeah,
So that's red back shroud. It is a legendary, very nice extended art cold foil,
that's
by the
true. It
way.
comes in extended art. Yep.
Comes with an extended art cold foil. So wreck havoc. I know this is wrecking havoc with most people who thought it was wreaking
For
havoc.
wreaking havoc on the
I
grammar.
don't. I think LSS is like doing this on purpose. I don't think they just forgot that it's supposed to be wreaking havoc, but I don't know.
We'll give them
Anyways,
credit,
so
benefit of the doubt. Like, yeah,
yeah, that this wasn't like on purpose. That we'll give the benefit of the doubt that this was on
it was
purpose
on
and not
purpose.
just an error.
We'll
Yeah.
go with that.
So this is CNC at home, folks. So this is going to be the set of taking arcane cards that probably were too strong, and
Yeah.
printing some friendlier versions. So this is the one that's going to be the CNC replacement when the price of CNCs are just too damn high because they're definitely going to be spiking a bit if they weren't already.
Hmm.
Generic rare, right at a 2 for 6, blocks for 2, so it's on rate for like a rare red attack. So defense reaction can't be played to the chain link, same as CNC. The on hit though, so you're still able to like ult him, react and stuff like that. Nothing's changed there. The on hit specifically targeting defense reactions though, right? So it's obviously a good card into more defensive decks, so especially ones that can filter um, Arsenal super well.
Hmm.
Sorry, that can't filter Arsenal super
Right.
well. Variations of like Dash, Bravo, possibly like more defensive Arachne bills. It really just depends on what kind of meta you're seeing. The other side of this is the Arsenal knowledge, which is kind of the if it didn't do anything outside of that, you still get to know what they have in their arsenal because the card reads you may turn a card in their arsenal face up, right?
Right.
So the knowing what your opponent has in the arsenal, as well as preventing some of the effects that rely on flipping an arsenal card, so like
Mm.
Skullbone Cross Wrap that flips for the opt.
Yep.
Knowing what your opponent has in arsenal might make your opponent play a different line, like a suboptimal line, because then you can see if it's like an attack reaction, or you can see if it's like an ender, like a combo ender or something like that. It's one less hidden card that could be like an attack reaction or something you need to consider. Or if it's like a bad card, it's even better because now you haven't wasted your precious CNC on it, right? And of course, you can still pummel the thing, which is actually really, really funny because you can pummel it. They can keep their crappy blue card in Arsenal that they didn't really have a choice, right?
Hmm.
And then you get to take a card from their hand, which is pretty good. So now they have 3 cards and a bad one in Arsenal.
Hmm.
It might really kind of screw up their most optimal plays. Now it's just a rare. However, because it's a rare, it's a lot more likely to, different colors, of course, but it's a
Yeah.
lot more likely to have an impact in something like a limited format, right? Rather than CNC, which was a majestic. So that is Wreck Havoc. I'm going to screw that
Wreck
up a lot of
Havoc.
times when we
Yeah, I'm gonna
actually
just say
play
wreak
CC.
havoc when I play it.
Yeah.
So there's no secret that this is not as powerful as CNC, right? It is not meant to replace CNC in most decks, but if you're using CNC in a deck that is meant to disrupt more of the defense reaction stuff, then this is the card that's going to replace CNC if you can't afford it. But I do think that this is not good in the sense where you're trying to disrupt aggressive decks because there's it's great when you play a CNC into Lexi and you're playing into Phi, just play a CNC and then they have to give you cards. This one they don't really
Mhm.
have to. They can just take the 6. So it has pros and
Yeah.
cons, but I think the pros outweigh the cons in this case. It is a pretty good card.
Yeah, which is fair. But the other piece is all the traps, right? So all the traps are defense
Yeah,
reactions.
that's true.
So, I think the Ranger defense reactions are going to be most of those for Riptide and such. So
Riptide.
it
Yep.
does definitely have more more utility in limited,
Yeah,
where you might see more of these come through as
agreed.
far as hitting these traps. But in general, is a card to look out for in CC for specific formats. So looking on to the next card here, we have Rudy's spoiler.
Mm.
I don't know if this was a
Was
pun saying
this on
toxicity
purpose?
here.
Yeah.
Never really know anymore, right? So this is an intense looking rare. I really like the art. If they had an extended art of this, I might actually like be like I don't usually do extended art rares very much, but I would probably like be down for an extended art rares of this. But
Yep.
it's looking at the base stats. It's a red 0 for 5 on hit, right? So it's not a 0 for 5 buff. You have to consider 0 for 5 buff would be kind of nuts in like pretty much every single way.
Yeah.
Way above rate, right? 0 for 5 buff, way above rate. So it's 0 for 5 on hit. So it's, I don't know if people remember Electrify from Tales of Aria, but this is the closest possible card here. Electrify was a one, the red one was a 1 cost for 3,
For 3, I
and you
believe.
drew a
Yeah.
card if it was an Arsenal. Yeah, so it's usually just better costing 0, and it doesn't have to be from Arsenal to gain that part of the effect, right? So you can just play it from hand. You don't need to like worry about where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Simply at the cost of being so specifically assassin or ranger attacks. And given that it seems attack reactions are quite heavy in assassin, as well as rangers like Azalea having ways of forcing through on his like dominate, this card could be a very powerful tool, even in the sideboard for like racing aggro decks forcing damage through heavy block decks. Because then if they end up being like, oh, I'll just leak 1 damage. Well, you're leaking 6 damage at that
Hmm.
point, right? So you really do have to make them commit cards. And I wouldn't be super surprised to see this ending up in a main board card for, depending on the color. I think the yellow for 4 is actually quite nice,
Hmm.
honestly, like a 0 for 4 in yellow, especially for Azalea. But it is just one of those other cards that give you more flexibility. And I think at being a rare, it also does have some pretty decent limited play interactions because you are 20 health, right? For most of the heroes. I think Arachne is 19, and I think Riptide's 19 also. So 5 health is quarter your health unlimited here. So it might see more play there, but it is
Hmm.
a overall card to look at for the upcoming meta.
Yeah, I think that this card is great into decks that don't like blocking you. We had a conversation earlier about this card, and we're thinking like if a deck doesn't like to block, they're gonna take the 5 probably, or they'll have to be forced to block. But in decks where you're blocking anyway, you're
Mhm.
probably putting this onto a card that has a pretty nasty breakpoint anyway of like 4 or 5 damage on an arrow or something. So
Mhm.
they got to give you 2 cards to fully block this anyway. So it's forcing the issue in kind of different ways in different decks. And
Yeah.
even though you wouldn't put this on a 3 attack card probably because it's an easy 1 card block, but if you put it on a 4 attack or 5 attack arrow, it's quite excellent. So I think
Mhm.
the value for the buff is definitely worth putting in your deck. All right.
Yeah, and on the other side, if you're putting it on a 3 power card, do they have an attack reaction? Are you going to commit more cards to block it? Because
That's true. This could
I
be a
can
good bait.
just exactly. It could be a pretty
Yeah,
good bait.
I think this is
But
great. It's true, and actually, it makes more sense maybe in Assassin because of the attack reactions that you'd run in Arachne. Um, in Azalea, you don't really have any attack reactions, but you do have the nice breakpoints. So it
mhm.
has a place in every class.
Yep, no, for
All
sure.
right.
Next one we have is Premeditate. So this is a generic card, but this is we had CNC at home. We have Plunder Run at home here. So when you can't go with the premium option, we are going with the generics, as they say. So I like how they definitely didn't think of that. That was just me. But it is really just Plunder Run, right? It's different because it's Plunder Run's banned in CC. But as a generic action, it's unironically as Azalea front and center, but it's a 0 for a +3 at base.
Yep.
It's a next attacks action you play from Arsenal, right? So instead of
This being played
Plunder Running
from
from Arsenal,
Arsenal.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So you could just play this from hand, and then you have your attack action from Arsenal. So that's the flip. And Plunder Run gave you the
The draw
on
card.
hit, it gave you the draw, and here it's just like you get the ponder, right? If you hit the next attack action that hits a hero this turn, you gain the ponder, so you're able to replenish your arsenal essentially after you draw it end turn. So it's very very similar. I like that it's a majestic. I
Mm-hmm.
think Plunder on rare was very very intense, especially having multiple
Run
colors
all 9. Yeah.
access to it. Yeah, and so it's specific from the arsenal. It's likely going to be best used with arrows, specifically a hero that likes buffing arrows. Wink wink nudge nudge. But it's the icing on the cake is it takes the ponder token to replace itself, right? And so you're always kind of trying to cycle your arsenal as much as you can and get to those like premium cards. It's an all around pretty great card. I'd like to test these in Azalea for the main board for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think like off the top of my head, this seems like the best home for it, but of course it is a generic, so you are able to kind of play this in other decks that come out of Arsenal maybe more commonly. So Riptide might be pretty good in Riptide. It might be I can't really see it being great in Lexi, honestly. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
mainly going to be focused on the on Riptide and
Azalea.
Azalea. Yeah, so that's Premeditate.
Yeah, I agree with that. Most buffs you run in Azalea are 0 for 3s with some upside. If you're looking at the uh, the one that destroys hand and arsenal at the end of the turn, I forget the name, but that's a pretty good upside to
Mm.
a 3 buff. But I think the drawing a card is pretty much on par with that. What's the name of that card again?
The
Seek
one that
Seek and
draws a
Destroy.
card.
Seek and
Oh,
Destroy.
so you can destroy. Yeah.
I think this card is pretty on par. It's a 3 buff that has a really good on hit ability.
Hmm.
This on hit carries through to all of your attacks, so there's a small upside to that. But the draw card, I think, I'd say it's comparable, if not better, because you can get a card to Arsenal for your next turn. So I like it a lot. I think
Yeah.
I think this is very close to being a main board card. You just gotta find a card to replace it with. But there are weaker cards than Seek and Destroy that you can take out for this card. So I think it has a good shot at being main board.
Yeah, no, it's totally fair. Needs some testing, but yeah, totally fair with that. The last one is a bit of a cop out, but it's the codexes.
The all three of them,
Um,
yeah.
the codexes are interesting in that it's the only real differences between them is the token they create and the source of the card it's using, right? So Blood Rot is putting it from hand. Frailty is putting it graveyard from sorry. Blood Rot's from hand, Frailty is from graveyard, Inertia's from top of the deck, right? So those are the main differences in case anyone was curious for the source of the card, right? So Blood Rot is the one we're starting with. It's the one I actually like the most. Um, this one is from hand, face down in Arsenal. It could be used as like a pseudo reload if necessary to then like flip with Barbed Castaway if you're playing like Riptide or something like that. And for instance, to get like an aim counter on it, and then assuming you don't have an arrow in arsenal, right? So on the flip side, if your opponent doesn't have an arsenal, then you put them on like a 3 card blocking hand, which increases the chance you get on hits and damage through, or make their your next turn less optimal, right? Because it's hand to unlike the other two, which they're getting the resource card, like the
Hmm.
card they're putting in arsenal, from outside of their hand. Blood Rot is like you don't get to draw the card after. You just put a card in the arsenal, and then you can only block with three
And the
cards,
other
right?
one's discard a card just to make up for that kind of not
Exactly.
putting it from hand. You get a card advantage. You got to give something back, right?
Exactly. And then because all these codexes give you a ponder, you can replenish the card at the end of your turn, right? To be able to arsenal that card. All of them have that. Blood Rot, as far as a token goes, it's usually 2 free damage on their turn because it costs 3 to get it, you know, to
Yeah,
remove it, which is not like if they have a 3 block card and they're either like, okay, well I pitch it or I block with it. It's like, okay, well I'll block with a 3 block. But if it's like a blue card that blocks for 2 and you want it back in your deck, you could pitch it. But outside of that scenario, it's kind of meh. So see this one being more on the Ranger side because it enables you to easily play cards like Death Touch, which is a great above rate
mm,
1 for 6, or Virulent Touch, which is also like a 0 for 4, pretty good card also. On the turn, you draw it without having to arsenal because you can't use a bow to get it in there because they're
yeah,
attack actions, they're not arrows. And Uzuri can also use it if she uses her ability to banish it, right? So in general, so it kind of allows Ranger to then get some kind of mechanic that lets you do that. But in general, I do like Codex of Bloodrot, probably more so for Ranger, but I can see Assassin using it. I don't see it being as good, but yeah,
yeah.
Bloodrot.
I think just in general, I think they are more tuned for Ranger because of you're allowed to put things in Arsenal. Now you could be running like you said the 1 for 6 that has to be played from Arsenal, but
Mhm.
I think in general Ranger prefers to play. Well, Ranger has to play from Arsenal, so this all of these three codexes I think are more flavorful for Ranger in my opinion. But we can talk about the other ones maybe right now, and we'll see if I'm wrong. If you have different opinions. So Frailty coming up next.
Yeah, so Frailty is the attack action from Graveyard. So the main point here is that it's related by way of like Become the Arcanite, right? So Become the Arcanite, of course, you play Become the Arcanite, and then you sacked either non-attack or attack, and you got the other one from your deck. In this particular case, Frailty, you're getting it from your graveyard, but you do have to play Codex, and then you have to discard a card, right? So the cost is 2 cards. It's the Codex and a
Yeah.
discard a card, and you get one from your grave. So you're paying 2 for 1. I'd probably like, unlike Blood Rod, I'd probably prefer the opponent like had an arsenal. Like I prefer if they have an
You don't want to
arsenal.
give them the option to take something from Grave to put into
Yeah, like
Arsenal.
they have
Yeah.
to just they could discard a card, but the problem is that like okay, so maybe they discard a useless card and you allow them to get a super powerful card in their
In their
graveyard
Arsenal.
because
Oh,
like
graveyard.
it's
Yeah.
not it's not sorry from graveyard into their arsenal, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
it's not random, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
like inertia, which is top of
Like
deck.
top of deck. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the key is like it's a little bit risky, right? So if they do have a very strong attack in the arsenal, that they can get the following turn if they just don't block. Frailty only reduces the power by 1
Right.
from the arsenal card and -1 on the weapon attacks, right? So yeah, you can bring them to 3 cards because they have to still discard the card, right? But
Yeah.
overall, you still need to use Codex, Frailty, and discard a card. So I can't see like I'm not super thrilled for that trade, but it
Yeah.
gets much better playing on like a 5 card hand when you like play it out of Arsenal. Then you have like an additional card that's not really needed for the turn. Probably good in the sideboard for Ranger, potentially like a main board for like Assassin. It really depends on how good Frailty is in the meta. So like
Yeah,
if all the meta decks are using
like
combos that like Frailty, like the weapons, like
the daggers.
the daggers and such, right? Or Katsu on Kadachis.
Yeah,
Well, they are daggers, but those
right,
kinds of decks they'll be better. But like if you're facing Guardian, you're just kind of like, all right,
right.
well,
There
it's
are
not
better
really
cards
doing
to
much for
play.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Frailty will
That's
not
the
be for
Codex Frailty.
everybody. I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure. Like, it's great against assassin, great against ninja,
Hmm.
but in general, so like you said, you're spending the card, you are gaining a card, but then you're also discarding a card. So it's a -1
Hmm.
overall. But then ponder
Hmm.
gives you a +1, so it does net out, right? Because everything gains a
At the
ponder
end of the turn,
at the
yeah.
end.
At
Yeah,
the end of the
exactly.
turn.
So you get your investment back, and then you're allowed to put something from hand in from grave for in arsenal. So very good in matchups where you foresee yourself being fatigued, also because you can get the card back, get a damage threat back into your arsenal,
Hmm.
right? So you're in the ledgers if you're Azalea,
Yeah.
and especially in Ranger because your bow doesn't do damage, so you're gonna want to have ways of getting arrows back in. So it's fine, but I think the other codexes just do this better, and they're
Hmm.
less situational as the frailty is. Blood Rot
Exactly.
is, Blood Rot is a little situational, but I think it has more of a
Yeah.
place in more matchups than the frailty token, in my opinion.
You also just don't have to discard a card with Blood Rot. So Frailty and
Right.
Inertia, you do have to discard a card, but Blood Rot you don't. So
Yeah.
Blood Rot, you are just using the Blood
It's a
Rot
free
replaces with
reload.
Ponder. Yeah, it's a free reload, but it's also a matter of it's 2 extra damage off Blood Rot,
Yeah.
right?
Which
So
is
you're getting a
guaranteed.
little bit more. It's pseudo guaranteed, but yeah,
Well, the
it's
detriment will be guaranteed because they either pitch 3 or take the 2.
yeah, and if they're on 3 cards, if they just put one in their arsenal and they have to block out whatever I'm doing on my hand, right? So
Mm.
it's a little bit awkward here. But Codex of Inertia is the last one we kind of want to touch on here. So this one uses the top card of your deck. It does have the discard effect too, right? Just like Frailty.
Yeah.
So the idea is that because it's not a card from hand, you need to kind of give them attack some other way. Otherwise, it's just plain better than Blood Rot. Because if it's literally like Blood Rot and you didn't have to discard a card, it'd be kind of
It'd be
broken. I
busted.
think
Yeah,
because
yeah. It'd be a
you get a free card
plus
from
one
outside
per
of your
nourishment.
hand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a +1 because it replaces itself with Ponder, and then
Exactly.
you get a card from your grave or your top of the deck, which you
Yeah,
didn't have before, right?
yeah.
So Inertia as top of deck it is interesting because it essentially denies them the arsenal because that's the inertia effect that at the end of their turn they have to put their cards from hand and their arsenal. So it's like Seek and Destroy, right? But instead of graveyard, I think Seek and Destroy is graveyard. Like all of them go
Yeah,
to
it
the
does
grave.
destroy everything. Yeah.
Yeah, inertia is you put them to the bottom of the deck, but it does rob them for an arsenal for a turn. So it's useful into most decks because a lot of decks like arsenals. Most
Mm-hmm.
decks like arsenal cards.
Yeah.
Specifically into the decks like Ranger and Oldhim that prioritize like good arsenals that you can just stop them having that extra utility. So like you're stopping Oldhim from Crown of Seeds, for instance, right? Like they won't be able to set that up.
Mm-hmm.
All of the Rangers seem to be very keen on arsenal cards, but of course there is good into aggro decks that like 5 card hands. I do not like that it potentially lets your opponent just like filter a bad card in your hand for a better one at the top of the deck. Because what they're able to do if they like drew too many blues or something like that,
Yeah.
and then they codex and they're like, oh sick, I'll just put this top card. Oh, it's a red? Cool.
Yeah.
Put this to your arsenal and you just discard a blue and you're just like, okay, so now they just don't block and their 4 card hand is like way better. Or they get like Artivore off the top or something.
Yeah.
I see it being a little bit
Yeah.
just for an inertia token because it really comes down to the fact that inertia seems less impactful face value than frailty. Because frailty, you can see the benefits under specific circumstances with for heroes that the -1 off the attack action is good because it's guaranteed. If they're putting an attack action there, it will
Yeah.
have -1. So it might be a lot easier to block, for instance. But inertia, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't get the arsenal, sure, but on the current hand, I'm not sure unless I'm not sure it comes into play unless certain metas take form where it's like more specifically targeting something.
Yeah.
I don't see it as good as Blood Rot or Frailty. I think Blood Rot and Frailty kind of are better in my mind up front, but Inertia is a thing and it is a Majestic, so you know maybe it'll be
Yeah.
good a little bit later when someone breaks it.
I think so. I think Blood Rot is my favorite of the three. The inertia
Yeah.
token, though, it's nice that you you're giving the opponent a card in their arsenal, but then if they don't play it, they have to get rid of it. So it's kind of
Exactly.
nice, right? It's kind of like that. It's a little bit of a not really risk reward, but you're giving your opponent something that, and you're kind of daring them to use it, or else they lose it, right? So if you give them
Yeah.
something that they don't really want to play on their turn, it might make their choice a bit difficult, right?
Yeah.
So if they get something bad in Arsenal, it's like, do I play it or do I lose it, kind of thing. It's like, well, I got this thing that I discarded a card for, right? So it's like, I guess I
Yeah.
should use it. I actually think that most of these codexes, if not all of them, are better when your opponent already has something in Arsenal. Because I don't really
Mhm.
like giving them the option to fix their hand, like you said,
Yeah.
because you
Especially
might make their
especially
turn repetitive.
frailty where they can. Yeah, especially frailty where they can pick. Like they pick something
Yeah.
from grave and they put it in there,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like
that's
it's
probably
not.
the worst. Yeah, that one I think
Yeah.
guaranteed. I'd rather play when they have an arsenal. Inertia
Yeah.
maybe.
Yours is random at least.
At least it's
Like it's
random,
just a
and
top card. It's a top card.
yeah, and as a ranger, you're probably opting anyway, so you're probably gonna see what's on top, so you can play it when it's more opportune for yourself. So
Mhm.
there's a merit to playing it when your opponent doesn't have anything, I guess. But anyway, I think all three of these have room in some form of another in some decks. My favorite being Blood Rot. Second favorite, I might prefer Inertia over Frailty. I think that denying an Arsenal is probably better in more circumstances than the -1 on the weapon swings. But
Mhm.
we'll do some testing. We'll figure that out. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's my opinion on the codexes.
Yeah, so that was our list. Back Shroud, Wreck Havoc. Well, I was
Wreck
going to stick
Havoc.
with them a lot. Toxicity, Premeditate, and the Codexes. Again, these aren't the like top cards by any means, but these are the kind of on the
More
stronger side
interesting.
and the
Yeah.
more interesting cards for up to end of Saturday. So we'll have the other video covering the rest from Sunday onwards, and more videos in the future covering more of our like top 10 once
Yeah.
we've done some testing as far as core cards, very strong cards, after some actual like analytics that we can get through here. So with that, hopefully you appreciated this kind of content. If you like this kind of content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. With that, from wherever you're watching in the world, have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Bye for now.